we can be blind to these sorts of things. We can pretend, or we could be like social media, like college coaches are just big babies, and they didn't like to pay players because they were greedy. Right? That's what social media does. But Nick Saban retired. Right? Nick Saban's like, I do think it's out of choice. Urban Meyer is retired from college football. Right? Didn't go well with Jacksonville. Right? There's some off the field stuff. But if Urban Meyer wanted to have any of these jobs, it's Urban damn Meyer gets a job. Urban staying away. In college basketball, Mike Krzyzewski, Roy Williams, Jim Boeheim. Look, they all kind of had aged out a little bit. But Brad Stevens, he got out of it. Billy Donovan, no desire to come back to college. There's something there to like, it's like when you walk into your kitchen and you just emptied the trash cans like 2 days ago or a day ago. Right? Like, something stinks. Right? You open up the fridge, everything looks fine. You open up the trash cans, like nothing like in there's what's in there. You can't. You ever had that? The stink in the kitchen, you have no idea where it's coming from. Well, you kind of know, right? I threw out day-old chicken. I forgot that it was in the bottom of the trash can, or I forgot that I had these leftovers and they're just sitting there, and my bad. It feels like this new era in college athletics. Some stinks, right? Some stinks. And I think of it as there was a progression and a way things worked. And I understand, look, I see through this stuff just like you do, right? How many of you hate this sentence? Well, we do it that way because that's the way we've always done it. Right? You ever hear that? That's the way we've always done it. So the NCAA, obviously, people think the only reason the rules were where players couldn't be compensated above that of a scholarship, and they got cost of tuition, and they got a Pell Grant, it wasn't enough. And part of that is that's the capitalist journey. I said this and I mean it. Like there's a lot of people who go, well, if the NCAA had just allowed athletes to make $10,000, that would have been enough. Right. Because if you pay somebody $10,000, they're not going to go, hey, I can make $50,000. I can make 60. I can make 70. It literally doesn't matter. The perfect example of that is NBA players who make 40 or 50 or $60 million a year. Like, well, I would play hard in the All-Star game if you put some money out there for it. Right? There's never enough money. And a little bit like if you ever had a dog that gets the taste of blood and likes it. Once they get that taste of blood, it's over. They're not gonna pick up a bird or a kitten and not think the same thing again. It's just the light switch goes on. And athletes, now that they've gotten compensated, you can't mentally getting them to go back is impossible. Well, Rick Pitino, of course, is a legendary coach. He's chosen to stay in the game or get back in the game. His team is falling apart at St. John's. Now, remember, there's 13 new players at St. John's. Whole new team. Here was his rant Sunday after another loss.
We are so non-athletic that we can't guard anybody without fouling. I don't think they move well laterally. I don't think they're going to pick it up in the next week. I think they're slow laterally. I mean, Sean Conway gives you everything he can. He's slow laterally. About 5 guys are slow laterally. Even the Celtics, when we lost, I've enjoyed every minute being a Boston Celtic coach. Didn't like the fact that we lost in that following year, but this has been the most unenjoyable experience I've had since I've been coaching.
Do you have any second thoughts of taking this job?
No, not at all. It's not St. John's. It's my team. I think they're very respectful. They hear, but they don't listen. It's taken me a month to get them to throw bounce passes. Actually, 2 months to throw bounce passes. Just thinking of getting ready for Georgetown because Georgetown could definitely beat us. I'm not even thinking of the future at all. I'm just thinking of the next game and the next game and the next game, and that's it.
So Pitino, speaking of Newsday yesterday, said, I truly wasn't ripping anybody. I was pointing out exactly in a monotone voice why we lost. I'm not always calm, and certainly not when I rip somebody. I was not ripping anybody. I sometimes want my players to hear my words, read my words. That was my intention. Okay, here's a couple things here. And I've gotten texts from people like, he should be suspended. Players won't play for him. Like, look, dude, I don't know how to tell you this, but college kids, they didn't read newspapers over the last 10 years. They definitely don't read newspapers now. They don't. They don't. And I'll defend players only because if you'd ask Pitino, he's like, where was the lie? I didn't lie. Nothing I said was wrong. Like, okay, yeah, but what level of truth do you want, right? You can tell the whole truth? You know, are you the same as you were? But nonetheless, it strikes me what's going on in college athletics, even at St. John's, is all part of a similar situation. We've completely changed the normal progress of events, right? You come in as a freshman, and the top 50 kids, the top 100 kids, they come there usually because they can start right away, right? And it's shakier than you surround young guys with older guys that can kind of pick them up. So they assimilate to your culture. Other players, you come in as freshmen, you come off the bench your first year, maybe your second year, and eventually your first year you come off the bench, your second year you're a starter, your third year you're all-league, your fourth year maybe you're competing for first team all-league and maybe all-American. Like the normal, and even for transfers, there's a whole process there where you transfer, you sit out because, and most of his players came from a lower level. You know, two of his top players came from the Ivy League. You got to adjust to playing for Rick Pitino. You got to adjust to the athleticism of that level of basketball. You got to adjust to the whole thing. And that year out actually helps you. We've screwed up the normal progress of events. You know what it reminds me of? Car industry. Now, you're going to have to be 35 plus, but it's happened recently as well. I think it happened after COVID. But if you remember after 9/11, do you remember what happened with the car industry? Nobody was buying cars. Everybody it was just fear-based, right? Like, what's going on? What's the future like? We're at war. It's scary. So car companies offered 0% financing. Like, really? Yeah. 5 years, 0% financing. And I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but the average car owner owns a car, I believe, between 3 to 5 years. 2's on the short end, 6's on the long end, 3 to 5's about right. And what happened was they went from the dealerships were dead, nobody was going, to everybody went and bought their car. Even people that had only owned their car for a year, less than a year, year and a half, they're like, dude, I got to get in one. Why? 0% financing. It worked. But then it screwed up the cycle, right? Because now, well, why would I get out of my car until I'm done paying it off when I pay 0% interest? And then you're like, you know, I paid it off. I get 0%. Why would I get a new car? I'm good. I got this one probably quicker than I should. I'll hold on to it a little bit longer than I should. And so the car industry, which was always kind of steady, stable, and oh yeah, by the way, if you work in radio or in sports radio, you know that up until gambling became legal, the car industry was the lifeblood, especially for local sports radio. The car industry went through another drop, and they've done the exact same thing now. Where we came out of COVID, they went to 0% financing. Everybody rushed, got out of their cars, got new cars. Now you're like, well, I got a new car. I'm not paying much in financing. Or we've done it with houses. Happened with the housing crash, happens now, right? You got in at a crazy low rate. Normally, you're in a house, and I've told people all the time, like, why would you do a 30-year fixed loan? Are you staying in that house for 30 years? Never understood the 30-year fixed loan. Why would you do a 7-in-1 arm? Because I've never been in a home for 7 years. Not one. And I've owned 9 of them. But I'll tell you with my car, like I've actually owned my car 7.5 years. It's super weird. I'm sure my car gets and goes, you again? Right? But the point is that there is a natural progression. And screwing up that natural progression happened in baseball. Like, what do you mean? When we had steroid guys, suddenly there were viable all-stars in their mid to late 30s. You're defying father time. So then there's like a 5 to 7 year stretch, maybe even 10-year stretch where there's lots of guys that were, borderline, low-level major leaguers that never got a shot. Right? Never got a shot. Then you take steroids out of the game, and all of a sudden, like there's this kind of, what's it called when it's like a suction, when there's a vacuum, right? It's like a talent vacuum. And then the game got super, super young. So I think one of the things that college athletics is going through is we've completely screwed up the natural progression of events. It's just not normal. And to anyone who says, well, it's just like the NBA, Rick Pitino has 13 new players at St. John's. There isn't an NBA team that replaces their entire team the next year. You had 3, 4, 5 guys at most. It's fine. There's 15 guys on a roster. The most you're going to add is 6 or 7 or whatever. For the most part, you got a stable core. Even when you have a new coach or new general manager, you got to keep some sort of stability. And you don't have it. So it causes you, one, to reach for guys that aren't at your level. That's what St. John's did. You got a lot of mid-major guys, and you're like, nobody wants to hear that, hey, there's a reason you played at the Ivy League or at the MAAC, the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference level. Why? Because you're 2 inches smaller than you should be, your position. You're not as athletic laterally, right? It doesn't mean you don't try hard, you're not a good player, but there's a difference between elite and semi-elite, quasi-elite, whatever. High major, mid-major, low major, there's a difference there. But we've screwed up the levels. We've screwed up the progression. We've completely changed this thing on the fly. And when you have a guy, and like Pitino's actually the perfect guy for it. He's literally won everywhere he's been. He went to Greece during like a quasi-sabbatical. He won there. He was winning at Iona. Like, go through it. Literally won everywhere. Now he's like, man, this is way harder than before. Why? We've completely changed while trying to present ourselves as the same thing. It's happened in college football. Right? College football, freshmen, you couldn't play those guys. Very, very rarely could you play a freshman. Why do you play him now? Well, because you paid an arm and a leg to get him there, and in order to keep him, you have to play him. And in order to keep the booster who funded your acquisition of them, you got to play him. Like, man, what? They're playing so many freshmen. It's not by choice. You think they want to? No. Freshmen, they don't know anything. They haven't learned yet. It's a completely different level of a sport. You're playing against grown men. Why do they do it? Because the new system dictates you have to do it, or he will leave, or the guy will stop funding whoever that player is. And you need that guy to fund that player to say, like, hey, look, we played him 15 snaps. He's going to be a star. We're going to need some more money to keep him next year. Well, I'm not paying a penny if I don't see him play. I can't see it. We've completely changed the life cycle of college sports. And when you do that, you put your entire industry in flux, just like the car industry did when they went to 0% financing.